The priest had just smiled, his voice a warm, gentle hum in the vast, silent church. "And do you, Alexander," he asked, turning to the man I loved, "take Isabella to be your lawfully wedded wife?" This was it, the moment I had dreamed of my entire life. I looked at Alex, my heart so full of love and a brilliant, hopeful joy that it felt like it might burst. The 200 people packed into the pews behind us, the thousands of dollars of flowers, the string quartet holding their breath, it all faded away. There was only him. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his blue eyes sparkling under the light of the stained glass windows. He turned to me, a serious, tender expression on his face. He leaned in close, as if to whisper one last sweet promise in my ear before he said, "I do." His whisper, when it came, was not a promise. It was a poison dart. "I can't," he breathed, his voice so quiet, so full of a shame that was a fraction of my own impending horror. "I'm so sorry, Izzy. I can't do this. I'm in love with her." My mind short-circuited. Her? Who? What? My gaze, confused and frantic, flickered past his shoulder to the front pew, to my maid of honor, my best friend since kindergarten, Sarah. Her face was as white as a sheet, her eyes wide with a look of pure, guilty terror, and in that single, soul-shattering moment, I understood everything. Alex didn't wait for my reaction. He straightened up, gave a small, apologetic shake of his head to the stunned priest, and then he did the unthinkable. He turned his back on me, on our life, on our future, and he walked, quickly and without a single backward glance, down the long aisle and out of the church, leaving me standing alone at the altar, a living statue of humiliation in a ridiculously expensive white dress. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. Then the silence was broken by a single collective gasp from our guests, a sound of 200 people witnessing a car crash. The whispers started immediately, a low, cruel hiss that snaked its way through the pews. I could feel their eyes on me, hundreds of pairs of eyes, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and secondhand shame. My world had not just ended, it had ended publicly, spectacularly, in the most humiliating way imaginable. A cold, blessedly numb shock washed over me. I don't remember walking back down the aisle. I don't remember the faces of my parents or his. I just remember finding myself outside, in the bright, indifferent sunshine. The sound of the church bells, which were meant to be celebrating my joy, now sounding like a mocking funeral dirge. I got into my car, the car that my bridesmaids had so lovingly decorated just hours before, with white ribbons and a "just married" sign on the back. And I drove. I just drove. I had no destination. I was running, not from a man, but from a moment. A moment that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my life. I drove for hours, the pristine white of my wedding dress becoming rumpled and stained with tears. The city gave way to suburbs, the suburbs to highways, and the highways to dark, winding country roads as the sun began to set. It was late, well after midnight, when I finally ran out of gas, both literally and figuratively. I found myself on a dark, unfamiliar road, in a part of the state I barely recognized. And then I saw a sign. "Welcome to Oak Haven. Population 732. A forgotten memory surfaced. Oak Haven. This was where she lived. My Aunt Margaret, my mother's estranged, older sister. A stern, practical woman I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. She was my only family within 100 miles. She was my only port in this catastrophic storm. I found her house, a small, severe-looking farmhouse at the end of a long, gravel driveway. The lights were off. With a deep, shuddering breath, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel, I got out of the car and walked to her door. I was a pathetic sight. My hair was a wreck, my makeup was a smeared, tear-streaked mess, and my beautiful, expensive wedding dress was now just a symbol of my ruin. I rang the doorbell. After a long moment, a porch light flickered on, and the door opened a crack. My aunt's stern, wrinkled face peered out, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of surprise and instant disapproval. "Good Lord, Isabella," she said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. "What on earth happened to you? You look like something the cat dragged in." The dam of my composure finally broke. "He left me," I sobbed, the words tearing from my throat. "At the altar. He left me, Aunt Margaret." I was expecting, if not a hug, then at least a flicker of sympathy, a kind word, an offer of tea. I received none. She just sighed, a long, weary sound of impatience, and rolled her eyes. "Well," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "I can't say I'm entirely surprised. I always knew he was out of your league. You are never going to hold on to a man like that." The cruelty of her words, so quick and so absolute, was like a second slap in the face. I have nowhere else to go," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Can I please just stay for a few nights, just until I can figure out what to do?" She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my ruined dress with open contempt. "I don't have room for you here," she said flatly. "This isn't a hotel for heartbroken girls." Then, a thought seemed to occur to her. Her expression shifted to one of grim, practical consideration. "But I suppose you can stay at the old Vineyard, the one my father left me. It's a ruin. Hasn't been touched in 20 years. The cottage is probably full of rats and the roof leaks, but it has 4 walls. It's more than you have now." She disappeared back into her house for a moment, returning with a single, ancient and deeply rusted iron key on a piece of frayed twine. She dropped it into my waiting palm. It was cold and heavy. "Here, it's about a mile down the road. You can't miss it. Don't come bothering me." And with that, for the second time in a single catastrophic day, a door was closed in my face. I stood there, alone in the darkness, on a cold porch in a town I didn't know, clutching a rusty key to a place of ruin, still wearing the beautiful, mocking dress from a life that was now gone forever. I was at the absolute bottom of the world. Before we continue, I would love to know where you're listening from. Let me know your city and country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Okay, let's get back to the story. I stood alone in the moonlit darkness, the cold, rusty key a heavy, alien object in my palm. The taillights of my aunt's sensible sedan disappeared down the gravel road, leaving me in a profound and unnerving silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. The adrenaline that had propelled me for hours across state lines had finally vanished, leaving behind it a hollow, aching exhaustion so complete it was a physical pain. I was at the absolute bottom of my life, a runaway bride in a ruined dress, standing at the gates of a forgotten vineyard. The gate, when I pushed it, groaned in protest, its hinges screeching like a dying animal. The driveway was little more than 2 ruts in the earth, overgrown with weeds that clawed at the hem of my once pristine wedding dress. At the end of the drive, the cottage stood like a ghost in the moonlight, its windows dark and empty eyes, its porch sagging with the weight of years of neglect. This was not a sanctuary. This was a tomb, a place my aunt had sent me to let my sorrow fester and die. The old iron key ground in the lock, but after a moment of resistance, it turned. The door swung open into a cloud of dust and the thick, musty smell of decay, disuse, and damp earth. Inside, the moonlight painted ghostly shapes on the dust-covered furniture. A single broken chair lay on its side. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy, draped themselves over a small, warped wooden table. A mouse skittered across the floorboards. This was my new home. I stood there in the center of the small room, the absurdity and the tragedy of my situation washing over me in a fresh wave of grief. Just 12 hours ago, I had been standing in a beautiful, sunlit church, surrounded by flowers and friends, about to marry the man I loved. Now, I was standing in a derelict cottage, my heart shattered, my future a terrifying blank void. My eyes fell upon my reflection in a shard of a broken mirror hanging on the wall. I saw a ghost staring back at me, a woman in a stained, torn, ridiculously expensive white dress, her hair a wild mess, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The dress, this symbol of my once bright future, now felt like a costume of a fool, a heavy shroud of my own public humiliation. With a surge of cold, final anger, I reached behind my back and began to fumble with the dozens of tiny pearl buttons. The dress finally loosened, and I let it fall from my shoulders. It pooled at my feet on the dusty floor, a beautiful, tragic heap of silk and broken dreams. I stepped out of it, leaving my old life behind, and wearing nothing but the simple slip from beneath it, I collapsed onto a dusty old mattress in the corner and let the merciful darkness of exhaustion finally take me. I awoke to the harsh, unforgiving light of morning. The reality of the previous day came crashing back, and for a moment I was paralyzed by a grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. But then a stubborn, unfamiliar feeling began to push back against the despair, a flicker of defiance. I would not let this place, this ruin, be the end of my story. I would not let my aunt's cruelty or Alex's betrayal be the final word. I got up, found an old pump in the backyard for water, and washed my face. Then I began to explore. The vineyard itself was a heartbreaking sight. It was a tangled, chaotic mess of neglect. The vines, ancient and gnarled, were being strangled by thick, thorny weeds. Most of them looked dead, their branches dry and brittle. It was a perfect reflection of how I felt inside. Forgotten, choked, and left to die. I walked the rows, my bare feet sinking into the soft, untended earth. I ran my hands over the rough bark of the old vines. And then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible sign of life. On one of the most gnarled, seemingly dead vines, a single, perfect, bright green leaf was stubbornly unfurling itself towards the sun. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. This place wasn't a tomb, it was a challenge. It was a survivor, just like me. And I knew, with a sudden, shocking clarity, exactly what I had to do. My secret weapon, the part of my life I had packed away to please my ex-fiancé, was about to become my salvation. My mind flashed back to my college years at UC Davis, a world away from the life of business and finance Alex had planned for us. I remembered the day I had declared my major, oenology and viticulture, the science of wine and the art of grape growing. I remembered the look of amused condescension on Alex's face when he'd visited me. "This is cute, Izzy," he had said, looking at my hands, stained with dirt from the university's teaching vineyard. "All this stuff about soil pH and grape skins, but what are you going to do with it? Become a farmer?" He had laughed. To him, my passion was a silly, impractical hobby, something to be tolerated before I settled down into my real job as his wife. To please him, I had let that part of myself go dormant. After graduation, I had taken a simple office job, and my deep knowledge of the vine had become a secret I kept, a garden I no longer tended. Until now. I walked back to the cottage with a new sense of purpose. I found a pair of old, rusted pruning shears in the dilapidated shed. My hands, which had once held champagne flutes at cocktail parties, now wrapped themselves around the rough wooden handles. I walked to the first row of vines and made the first cut. The work was brutal,
back-breaking, and utterly therapeutic. I worked from sunrise to sunset. I cleared the choking weeds, I repaired the broken trellises, and I pruned. With a knowledge that felt instinctual, I began the meticulous, surgical process of cutting away the dead wood, saving the living parts of the vine, giving them a chance to breathe, to live again. My hands, soft and manicured just days ago, became blistered, then calloused. My back ached with a constant dull fire. My body was exhausted, but my spirit, for the first time since I had stood alone at that altar, began to heal. I wasn't just pruning vines, I was pruning my own life. With every snip of the shears, I cut away a memory of Alex's casual dismissal. With every weed I pulled, I tore out a root of my aunt's cold judgment. I was pouring all my grief, all my rage, all my heartbreak into the rich, dark soil of this forgotten place. And I began to feel a strange, fierce hope take root. This vineyard, like me, had been abandoned and left for dead. But we were not dead. We were just waiting for a second chance. And we were going to take it together. The first few weeks of the vineyard were a blur of aching muscles, splintered hands, and the deep, dreamless sleep of pure physical exhaustion. I worked from the moment the sun first cast its pale, watery light over the eastern hills until my body would simply refuse to move an inch further. My world shrank to the small, neglected plot of land. There was no past, no future. There was only the immediate, tangible task at hand. The war against the weeds, the battle with the thorny overgrowth, the slow, methodical untangling of years of neglect. The pain in my body was a welcome distraction from the pain in my heart. I realized, pouring my grief into the soil, and in return, the soil was giving me a reason to get up in the morning.
As winter slowly gave way to a cool, damp spring, I began the real work, the pruning. It was a delicate, intuitive art I hadn't practiced since my university days, but my hands remembered. I would stand before each gnarled, ancient Zinfandel vine, some of them as thick as my arm, and I would read its story. I could see where it had been poorly pruned in the past, where it had struggled, where it still held a stubborn spark of life. "Okay, old friend," I would whisper to the vines, "let's see what we can do." With my rusted shears, I began the surgical process of cutting away the dead wood, making careful, strategic cuts to encourage new, fruitful growth. It was a slow, meditative process, and with each snip, it felt like I was also pruning away the dead parts of my own past life. The local villagers in Oak Haven had been wary of me at first. I was a strange curiosity. The mysterious woman who had shown up in the middle of the night in a ruined wedding dress and taken up residence in the Ghost Creek Vineyard, a place most of them believed to be haunted or hopelessly barren. They would watch me from a distance as I worked, a lone figure in the vast, tangled fields. The change came in the form of an old, weathered farmer named Mr. Rossi. He had lived in the valley his entire life, and remembered my great-uncle, the one who had originally planted the vineyard. He drove his old, rattling pickup truck up my driveway one afternoon, his face skeptical, his eyes sharp. He watched me for a long time as I worked on a particularly difficult vine. "You're cutting it all back," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Most people would be afraid to prune so hard. The old wood can't bear new fruit. You have to cut it back to the strongest canes to focus the vine's energy. It's the only way to get a low yield with concentrated flavor." He was silent for a moment. I had just passed a test I didn't even know I was taking. "You know what you're doing," he said, his voice now holding a note of surprised respect. "My father used to say the same thing." From that day on, Mr. Rossi became my silent champion. He'd stop by once a week, never offering help directly, but always leaving something on my porch. A basket of fresh vegetables from his garden, a new, sharp pair of pruning shears, a jar of his wife's famous peach preserves. He started talking about me in the village. Not as the crazy runaway bride, but as the hard-working girl who's bringing the old vineyard back. Slowly, other locals began to warm to me. I was no longer an object of pity or suspicion. I was just Isabella, the woman who was trying to grow something beautiful from a place of ruin. As spring deepened into a warm, vibrant summer, the vineyard transformed. The vines, which had once been skeletal and gray, were now covered in a canopy of lush, brilliant green leaves. And then the miracle happened. Tiny, green, bead-like clusters began to form. Grapes. The old vines were not dead. They were producing fruit. I walked the rows, tears streaming down my face, my heart filled with a hope so fierce it felt like it might burst. The harvest came in late September. It wasn't a large crop, but the grapes that had grown were magnificent. They were small, dark, and intensely fragrant, the result of old vines and a season of hard work. It was too much for me to pick alone, but I didn't have to. On the first day of the harvest, a small convoy of pickup trucks rumbled up my driveway. It was Mr. Rossi, and he had brought with him a dozen other farmers and their families from the village. They came with picking shears, with baskets, with a massive picnic lunch. "Thought you could use a hand," Mr. Rossi said, with a shrug and a smile.
The day was filled with laughter, with shared stories, with the simple, profound joy of a community coming together. As we worked side by side, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt since I was a child. This was a new kind of family, one forged not by blood, but by shared work and mutual respect. That evening, as we looked at the small but precious pile of harvested grapes, I was faced with a decision. The safe, practical choice was to sell the grapes to a larger winery. But as I looked down into the dark, dusty cellar of the cottage, at the old, forgotten wine press and the large oak fermentation tanks, another idea, a wild and terrifying one, took root. I would make the wine myself. It was an insane gamble. The equipment was ancient. I would have to do everything by hand, but it felt right. It felt like the final, necessary step in my own transformation. I had poured my grief into the soil. Now, I would pour my hope into the wine. My new friends, caught up in my vision, helped me clean and restore the old equipment. And then came the moment of truth. We poured the deep purple grapes into the press. I turned the heavy iron wheel, and with a groan of old wood and a surge of pure, unadulterated hope, the first drops of juice, the must, began to flow. I was no longer a heartbroken bride running from her past. I was a winemaker, creating a future, one drop at a time. The work was just beginning. The 6 months that followed the harvest were a time of quiet, watchful patience. Autumn painted the valley in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson, and the leaves on my vines withered and fell, leaving the gnarled, pruned branches exposed to the coming winter. The vineyard slept, and in the small, stone-walled cellar beneath my cottage, my wine did the same. It rested in 2 old, recoopered oak barrels, slowly, magically transforming from simple grape juice into something more. In that quiet time, I healed. The sharp, jagged edges of my heartbreak had been worn smooth by the rhythm of the seasons and the simple, profound satisfaction of hard work. I had found a quiet peace in my little cottage, a sense of belonging with my new friends in the village, a purpose in this forgotten patch of land. I almost forgotten the world I had run from. But of course, that world had not forgotten me. It was a crisp, clear day in early winter. I was outside mending a section of broken fence when I saw the unfamiliar, expensive-looking sedan crunching its way up my gravel driveway. It was my Aunt Margaret. Behind her was a second car, a sensible sedan with a local real estate agency's logo on the side.
My heart, which had been so calm for so long, gave a sudden hard thud against my ribs. I knew exactly why she was here. She was here to sell my sanctuary. She stepped out of her car, dressed in a sharp city coat and heels that were completely impractical for a farm. She looked around and her jaw literally dropped. The last time she had seen this place, it was a ruin, a symbol of decay she had so contemptuously thrown at me. Now, it was a picture of rustic, cared-for beauty. The cottage, which had been dilapidated, now had a freshly painted door and pots of winter pansies on the porch. The fields, once choked with thorns and weeds, were now neat, orderly rows of pruned sleeping vines. "Isabella?" she said, her voice a mixture of shock and suspicion, as I walked over to greet her. "What on earth have you done to this place?" Before I could answer, the realtor, a harried-looking man in a cheap suit, joined us. "Margaret," he said, looking around with a confused expression, "you told me this was abandoned, derelict land. This is a fully tended, operational vineyard."
"It's nothing," my aunt snapped, shooting me a venomous look. "She's just been playing in the dirt. The land itself is what matters." "Hello, Aunt Margaret," I said, my voice calm and even. My hands were calloused and there was dirt under my fingernails, but I had never felt more powerful or more at home. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't take that tone with me, young lady," she said. "I'm here to sell my property. Mr. Jones has a client, a developer, who is interested in the land, so you'll need to pack up your little things and be out by the end of the month." She was so certain, so dismissive. She still saw me as the heartbroken girl in the ruined dress. She had no idea who I had become. As if summoned by some cosmic dramatic force, a third car appeared at the end of the driveway at that very moment. It was a sleek, black rental car, the kind that whispered of quiet, serious money. A distinguished, silver-haired man in a beautifully tailored tweed jacket got out. He was not a developer. I recognized him instantly from every major wine publication in the world. He was Julian Croft, the most feared and respected wine critic in the country. My heart stopped. He ignored my aunt and the realtor completely, his sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the vineyard before landing on me. "Miss Isabella?" he asked, his voice a cultured, pleasant baritone. He walked towards me, his hand outstretched. "I do hope I'm not intruding. My name is Julian Croft." My aunt let out a small, strangled gasp. She knew the name. "I was in the region visiting a larger winery," he continued, "and I heard the most unbelievable rumor from an old farmer at a local tavern. He spoke of a miracle vintage being produced at the old, forgotten Ghost Creek vineyard. He said a young woman was bringing the dead back to life. I confess, my curiosity got the better of me. I had to see for myself. I was speechless. I just shook his hand, my mind reeling. Mr. Rossi, my dear friend, had done this. "It's just a very small first batch, Mr. Croft. I'm not a professional. My dear," he said with a warm smile, "the greatest wines in the world are rarely made by professionals. They are made by passionate artists. May I?" He gestured towards the cottage, towards the cellar beneath it. I led him down the stone steps into my small, rustic cellar. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth, fermenting fruit, and old oak. My aunt, the realtor, and a now very intrigued-looking David followed us, their faces a mixture of confusion and apprehension. I took a wine thief, a long glass tube, and drew a sample of the deep ruby-red liquid from one of the barrels. I poured it into a clean glass and handed it to him. He held the glass up to the single dusty light bulb, admiring the color. He swirled it gently, releasing its aroma. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Then he took a slow, contemplative sip. The silence in the cellar was absolute. He held the wine in his mouth for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he swallowed. His eyes, when they opened, were wide, with a look of pure, unadulterated shock and delight. "My God," he whispered, his voice full of a reverence I had only ever read about. He took another sip. "This is extraordinary, impossible." He looked at me, his eyes full of a new, profound respect.
The complexity, the depth of the dark fruit, the hint of spice, the structure. To coax this level of character from these ancient, neglected Zinfandel vines? My dear, this is not just wine. This is a story in a bottle. This is a work of art. This is without a doubt one of the most exciting new wines I have tasted in a decade.
The realtor, whose jaw had been slowly dropping throughout the critic's speech, finally turned to my aunt. His voice was a choked, incredulous whisper. "Margaret," he said, "you told me this was 50 acres of worthless scrubland. This is a producing boutique winery with the potential 99-point rating from Julian Croft. This property isn't worth $50,000. With the business, the brand, the story, it's worth millions." I looked at my aunt. Her face was a ruin. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of greed, regret, and impotent fury. The gold mine she had dismissed, the niece she had scorned, the ruin she had sent me to, it had all transformed into a treasure she could now never touch. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that was almost pitiable. "This should be mine," she hissed. "This is my land." I looked at her, at my beautiful, thriving vines, at the glass of deep red wine in the world's most important critic's hand, and I felt nothing but a quiet, powerful peace. "No, Aunt Margaret," I said softly, my voice clear and steady. "You were right. You gave me a ruin, and I built something beautiful from it. This place and this life are mine now." She had no reply. She turned and stormed out of the cellar, a woman defeated by her own lack of vision. Later that day, after Mr. Croft had left, promising a full-page feature in his magazine, I stood alone in my vineyard as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. My vindication wasn't the look of horror on my aunt's face. It wasn't the promise of fame or wealth. It was this, the quiet satisfaction of creation. I had arrived here, shattered and broken, a runaway bride. And in 6 months, I had become a winemaker. I had taken the ugliest moment of my life and I had transformed it into the most beautiful thing I had ever made. I raised my own glass of wine to the setting sun, a silent toast not to a failed marriage, but to a new, fruitful, and fiercely independent life.